Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. I have with me a very special guest named Jake Doherty. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty good, Guy. Thanks for having me on the show today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. It is lovely to talk with you today. And you are essentially a tour guide, shall we say. Um, if I don't want to minimize your work, but just to say that you will take anyone on a tour on some of the most exciting locations, attractive spots in Europe.
That's a good way to put it, Guy. I originally from Louisiana and United States, went to college in Atlanta, Georgia, and then couldn't get a real job with a European history degree. And so I decided I wanted to go see what I studied. So I hopped on a plane. I came over to Europe, and that was 23 years ago. Started traveling. I lived in Austria, Italy, Switzerland, Holland, and eventually I ended up in Germany, of all places, where I fell in love with southern Germany, a region called Bavaria, which is absolutely stunning. And the people here, their
Prost,
history,
Prost.
yeah, Prost, yeah, ganz genau. Their history, their culture, their beer, everything. It has grabbed me. And I do. I am a tour guide. That's exactly what I am. You summed it up. I love taking people to some of the most amazing places in and around here and showing them the tips and the tricks to kind of get around the crowds and the stress of it all and make travel fun. And so that's what we
Mm.
do at my business, All Things Garmish. And then also my other one, which is called Bavarian Beer Vacations. We focus, of course, on beer in Bavaria and the history of Bavaria and the history of the beer culture that they have here.
Dire avec bon voyage, maybe to add another B. To have a nice,
Another B.
nice initials for your company. To have
Yeah.
BBB maybe. Travels or stuff like this. But people
Mhm.
will think it's a bed and breakfast or something like this because by accident.
Definitely could. Definitely could. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've had both of those businesses for 11 years, going on 12 as of next month, actually. And we've been very blessed. Pre-COVID, my wife and I, we had a staff of anywhere from 2 to 6 people, depending on the time of year. And we were running tours pretty much 7 days a week. It was a lot of fun.
So can you take me on an interesting tour alongside with you, with under your aegis, let's say, with a couple of random imaginary people, or maybe people who are putting themselves in the shoes of people who you guide through. And
Of course.
let's go on a little vacation to an attractive, I don't know, medieval castle, or
Let's do it.
or some kind of a lord's sex dungeon or something like this, or something.
Well, something off the wall. Well, let's do
Yes,
it. The
yes.
first thing that would happen is, of course, our tours at All Things Garmish, they're all private. I don't do big group tours. I don't do bus tours, any of that kind of stuff. We prefer to have a very intimate relationship with our clients. So it's going to be a one-on-one experience. We pick you up in one of our Mercedes V-Class vans, which hold up to 7 people.
Nice, nice.
We pick you up in the Mercedes. They all got the sunroof, so you see the Alps as we drive through.
You're not in Cali. You're not in Cali, yeah.
Correct. So we're going to pick you up. We're going to either pick you up in Munich or in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany. And then we're going to drive through the Alps. We're going to go down into Tyrol, which is the mountainous region of Austria, which was a duchy of the Habsburg dynasty until the Napoleonic
Mm.
Wars. We're going to go straight through there. We're going to follow a very old trade route. It's called the Fern Pass, originally given license in the 12th century by Barbarossa the Red to be a trade route of the Holy Roman Empire.
Damn.
And then we're going to pop back into Germany. It's just a little coinky dink of geography that Austria has this neat little peninsula in Germany. And if I pick you up in Garmisch, we're going to cross it. And we're going to come back into Germany at the town of Füssen. And then from Füssen, Guy, we can actually start to see on the side of a mountain just what you're looking for. A really cool medieval castle. And it's called Neuschwanstein. Now, Neuschwanstein isn't exactly medieval. It was built in the 19th century, 1800s, but it sits on top of a much older castle dating back to the 15th century. Now, the castle was built by Ludwig II. Ludwig II is one of the last great kings of the Wittelsbach dynasty to rule Bavaria. And he was the last one to rule Bavaria as an autonomous country. Bavaria, where I live, was given license in 1180 by Barbarossa the Red to be ruled by the Wittelsbachs. And the Wittelsbach family ruled Bavaria until 1918, technically. It made them one of the longest ruling families in Europe. Well, Ludwig II, this particular king, his life is filled with great mystery and tragedy, and his castle Neuschwanstein captures that whole sense of beauty, intrigue, yet fascination and unknown. Neuschwanstein, it's got these beautiful towers, and it's oftentimes called the Princess Castle because Walt Disney was inspired after seeing it when in his travels.
Yeah.
And it was eventually used in one of his cartoons. It's called Sleeping Beauty's Castle. Yeah, it's beautiful. And Ludwig's life,
the princess is in another castle.
Exactly. Well, in a case, there's Hohenschwangau, which is right below Neuschwanstein. So you have two castles to choose from. So you can maybe say the princesses are there. But in any case, Ludwig II, he built Neuschwanstein on top of an older castle ruin. And when he built it with all of his dreams and hopes of creating something that captured his idea of medieval fantasy, this idea of the noble knight. And it kind of centers around one of his favorite stories, which is the tale of Lohengrin. Lohengrin eventually was put to prose by Goethe, but then Richard Wagner got a hold of it in the 1800s and turned it into
Richard Wagner, yeah.
That scary, interesting man with his own political ideal.
I like his thesis about Jews and music because I'm a Jew and I like music. So, but he's a very controversial figure in Israel. Is not a,
So.
for decades his music was banned, and not legally, but culturally and socially he was excommunicated, persona non grata, as we say.
It's interesting because Ludwig II, the man who built Neuschwanstein, he's the man who saved Richard Wagner from obscurity. If it wasn't for Ludwig II, Wagner would have died of some venereal disease in Switzerland. Ludwig saved the man and brought him back into the limelight. He bought his operas that Wagner had sold because he had a gambling addiction. And he put Wagner to work in the city of Munich until eventually Wagner, because of his own political ambitions, was kicked out of Munich. He was forced out of the city. But Ludwig continued to support Wagner until his death. Now, Neuschwanstein, the castle we're speaking of, interestingly enough, it has a beautiful theater, which Ludwig built for his friend Richard Wagner. Sadly, though, the theater was never used because Wagner died before it was completed. And Ludwig locked the doors. He wouldn't allow anyone to perform there. It wasn't until 1934 that there was an official concert inside the Singers Hall, as it's called in Neuschwanstein. And yes, that very evil man, he was in attendance. That's where Adolf Hitler got to see some of his first Wagner pieces performed in Neuschwanstein, which captures the beauty of Lohengrin, the opera written by Wagner. So yeah, there is a lot of the dichotomy of evil with purity kind of comes back and forth into our tale. So it was really quite horrible. Yeah.
Also Tannhäuser.
Yeah, Tannenhauser. Now, yes. Yeah. In fact, Ludwig II at Linderhof Palace, which was a small French chalet that he built here in the Linden Valley, just outside of Oberammergau, he built above it a beautiful grotto with a cave and a boat and a waterfall and a stage and the first electricity generators to provide him with lights that were different colors. And the whole thing was designed to look like a set piece from Tannhäuser. So yeah, it's crazy. It's all here. This is where it all kind of comes around. It's fascinating.
So I'm so excited by the first attraction that I want a second one, actually.
A second one. Well, we're gonna
Yes.
switch. Let's switch complete gears, guy. What I'll do is I'll
Yeah.
pick you up in Munich. Okay, so
Mm.
I picked you up in Garmisch-Partenkirchen in the Mercedes V class. Let's go to Munich. You're going to be staying in a nice hotel in downtown Munich in the Marienplatz, Mary's Place. I'll pick you up, and instead of using the vans, we'll walk, because today we're going to be doing some stuff that you shouldn't be doing while driving.
Oh
We'll be
no.
drinking some beer. We'll be drinking some beer. And what we'll do is
Damn.
we'll go to downtown Munich, and we're going to hit all of my favorite beer gardens. And there are a bunch. The history of beer is the history of Bavaria. Bavarians like to think they created beer. That's not true. Beer dates back a lot longer than the Bavarians, but
Yes.
Bavaria still creates, yeah. Bavaria still
Probably
creates, well, it
probably
goes back.
the Sumerians or something like this probably created, or the maybe the ancient Egyptians actually. It's
Mhm.
it is
The first, on record, it's the ancient Egyptians and the Sumerians, actually. In fact, Imhotep in Babylonia, or was it Samaria? I forget which. He wrote his laws down in verse. The first set of laws that we
maybe
found.
Hammurabi maybe.
Yeah, Hammurabi, one of them. I can't remember. And several of the verses were dedicated to his favorite types of beer and how to brew it.
Oh.
But yeah, so basically it follows the Fertile Crescent. And then if you go south, you follow the production of grapes and wine, fermentation of wine, of grapes for wine. You follow north, the cold weather migrations of mankind. Yeah, you're going to follow the migrations of beer, grains, basically cold weather crops. And beer over here, it's a way of life. The Bavarians still produce 42% of the hops used, 42% of the hops used in beer worldwide. Still, the only larger hops producer in the world is the United States.
But
But
I just want to tell you a secret, and I don't want the German people, die Volk, to hear to hear that Czech beers
the Czechs do make really good beers, and it's interesting. But I'll have to bring it back, guy. The very first brewer to create pills in Czechoslovakia, which became sort of the signature beer of Czechia. He was German. He was from Bavaria. He was a very interesting man. He was scorned by his father, who had a brewery just outside of Freising in Munich, and because he was gay. And so the young man, he packed his stuff up and he went to Czechoslovakia, and he created one of the most iconic beers ever, Pilsner. And eventually, after his father's death, he came back to Bavaria, and that's the foundations for Helles, which is a light beer that we drink here, which is the foundations for what they sell in America, which is called lager. Now, ironically, the word lager, it doesn't mean beer. Lager just means to put something on a shelf. I think it's actually the same word in a couple of different languages. But in any case,
Yeah,
so
we
a lager.
say in Hebrew the everyone who came in the first Aliyah. Aliyah is the first settlement in Israel.
Mhm.
They were of German descent, German and Russian, and they said Schlager. Yeah,
Mhm.
Schlager.
Mhm.
They
Yeah,
use this
Schlager.
word. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A Schlager, exactly. And it goes to the way that they would store beer. In the olden days, they couldn't brew beer in the summer because it was a fire hazard. Plus, you need to cool down your wort before you add the yeast, or you run the risk of killing the yeast. And so you needed cold temperatures in order to brew beer. So they would brew beer that they would drink in the summer. They would brew it in the month of March. And that's the birth of the Märzen beer. And what they do is brew lots and lots of beer, put it into wooden barrels, and then they would store it underground in cold, cool areas, traditionally in kellers and basements. And when they would bring these large barrels underground, they would put them on shelves. They would lager them, they'd schlager them. And so that's the birth of a lager beer right there. And that's also the birth, guy, of where I will be taking you. You see, a beer garden, basically in the city of Munich, when they would lager all these beers, they would dig these giant holes, and they put the beer down there in these big, big, basically underground caves that they'd make. And then they would cover them with dirt, and they'd plant these trees, these horse nut trees that had big leaves and shallow roots.
Mm.
And the locals in Munich loved to go sit underneath the trees and have a picnic for lunch.
Mm.
Eventually, the breweries began to capitalize on it, and they started selling beer and putting in tables. And that's the birth of a beer garden. So
Yeah,
yeah,
there
that's what.
are the botanical gardens are very popular in a lot of capital cities in
Mhm.
Europe for people to have a simulated experience of nature, shall we say?
That's very
Yes.
true. That's an interesting. That's a very good point. Simulated experience of nature. I like that.
Yes, well, it's I like to make fun of the 19th century because they were essentially living in a technological dark age. The internet has stopped everything that was, I don't know, maybe exacerbated the, I don't know, the maybe the fakeness or the fake veneer that has to do with everything in this earth. Um, Everything comes with a twist, with an angle, and history is very much like this because
Mm,
you get a packaged, one-sided narrative that does not reflect anything other than the grandiose nature of the culture of power, monarchy. But that's I think that Europe has straddled a little bit behind, but I think it's making up for the for two world wars and
mm.
an infinitesimal other wars that came before it, before those two great. I don't know if you can call them great wars. How can you how can you say that? But on the other hand, they were great. Um, but I want to thank you so much for talking with me and agreeing to appear on my podcast. And it was a great enlivening experience, and I'm looking forward to talking with you and use more German words.
Yeah, yeah. Super, guy. That sounds like a lot of fun. I'd love to speak with you again anytime your heart desires. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
Yeah. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye bye. Yes.